Hey guys, what's going on? This is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our DraftKings wide receiver picks for week 3. The top guy that's going to be on my list today is going to be Antonio Brown. Brown plays in a pretty high total game against the St. Louis Rams, and Brown has been a target monster lately. I mean, this is a guy who's seen double-digit targets every game. He has 9 catches in both games so far this season. He's done it for over 100 yards in both games and a touchdown in each one as well. Just based off those numbers, that's 28 fantasy points for a guy who's 8,900, which is over 3 points per $1,000 of cost. Now, he's actually had some big games where he's put up, well over 100 yards too, and is averaging 35 fantasy points per game so far through the first 2 games. Now, a lot of people are worried about his production with Le'Veon Bell coming back, but here's the way that I look at this game. St. Louis is a team that usually prides itself on stopping the run, and last week they were absolutely gashed by that Washington team. So if they're going to do anything, I think they're going to concentrate on trying to stop the run and trying to make sure that Le'Veon Bell doesn't get off. So I do think that Antonio Brown is going to be the path of least resistance for that offense for Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has been throwing the ball an absolute ton since about the middle of last year. They're averaging a ton of yards. They're averaging a ton of passing attempts, and Big Ben looks really good right now. So if I'm looking at anybody in that game, I think Antonio Brown is still basically the chalk top wide receiver that is out there today. I like him a lot more than I like Julio Jones, who's the other guy that people will be paying up for this week. I do see a little bit of merit in Odell Beckham if you're playing in the Thursday games, but if I had to choose between those guys, like I said, Antonio Brown is still the guy that I'm going to be going with, and so far he hasn't let me down, so I'm not going to jump off that train yet. The next guy I want to talk about is Emmanuel Sanders from the Denver Broncos. He has a good matchup today or a good matchup for Sunday with Rasheed Mathis, who's a guy that can be beat by quick receivers, and Emmanuel Sanders, despite his size, is basically a fast receiver. He does a lot of underneath stuff, runs a lot of slants, gets a lot of those short passes, which are passes that Peyton Manning is basically able to still throw at this point in his career. Now, the thing that I really like about Sanders and Manning, actually, basically the whole Denver offense together, is in the second half of that game, they really figured out that putting Manning under center is probably not the best way to use him. Excuse me. Putting Manning under center is probably not the best way to use him. He doesn't have quick feet at this point in his career. He's not able to make those 3- and 5-step drops and then turn around and throw. Basically, he's a lot better when he gets to sit back in the shotgun, look at the defense, see what the defense is doing, figure out where the weakness is, get the ball in the shotgun, and then just turn and throw it to where the open man's going to be. So I'm expecting them to do a lot better with the passing game in this game. And I also think that that's actually better for their running backs as well, especially C.J. Anderson. Last year when they ran that, C.J. Anderson had a ton of yards, looked like an absolute fantasy stud, was a reason that people were drafting him in the first round. So if you can get a guy like Sanders at a pretty decent price today of $7,600, I don't think he's going to be too highly owned, but I do think that he has a good chance for a big upside here today. He's been averaging 8 catches on over 10 targets so far this year. And again, I just think that he's somebody that you want to have in your roster. He does have a lot of upside. He will make a lot of catches. He's not going to get a ton of yards, though. Like I said, he makes a lot of those shorter catches underneath, routes that go 6 to 9 yards somewhere in there. And if he does have a big game yardage-wise, it's usually because he takes like a slant and breaks it for a big gain, or if he catches a pass and breaks a tackle or two and winds up running it. So I wouldn't expect an absolute ton of yards out of him. He's not a lock for the 100-yard bonus like I think Antonio Brown might be. But I do think he has big upside, and I do think he has touchdown upside as well. Excuse me, I'm a little under the weather today. Brandon Marshall is the next guy I want to talk about. There's no Eric Decker most likely in this game, and even Chris Owasu, who's the number 3 wide receiver, is also going to be out. But it is a high total with 48. They're going up against that Philadelphia team that plays at a fast pace. So if you can get a fast pace, that's going to be more plays. More plays is going to equal more yardage. It's going to equal more attempts overall. So it's going to be a good situation here for Brandon Marshall. He has a matchup with Byron Maxwell. Maxwell has been absolutely horrendous this year. Quarterback passer ratings on passes going to Maxwell, as my partner Josh Kalachi points out, is getting close to about 160. which is basically near perfect at this point in the season. Marshall's a guy who has 13 catches already for 163 yards and 2 touchdowns in 2 games. He's done it on 19 targets, and for some reason, his price on DraftKings is only $6,200 this week. $6,200 is way too cheap for a guy that has the kind of upside that Marshall can offer, and he's going to be a guy who finds his way into a lot of my lineups, both cash and GPP lineups. Next guy I want to talk about is another guy who I think is drastically underpriced, and that's Dante Moncrief from the Indianapolis Colts. He has a good matchup with Parrish Cox of the Tennessee Titans, and I do expect Andrew Luck to bounce back and have a much better game here than he's shown in the first 2 weeks. So far, Moncrief basically didn't have a good first half of the first game, but when T.Y. Hilton went down, he's been an absolute stud for the last 6 quarters for the Indianapolis Colts. 13 catches, 168 yards, 2 touchdowns. Again, this is another high total game, 48 overall. Indianapolis is favored, so you're figuring that they're going to put up probably 27, 28 points here is the intrinsic number from the Vegas lines. And basically at this point, with T.Y. being banged up, and Andre Johnson has looked horrendous so far to start the season, I think you got to figure that Moncrief is basically the number 1 wide receiver at this point for the Indianapolis Colts. And, you know, being a number 1 wide receiver for Andrew Luck is definitely something that's going to carry some value. Luck looks to him a lot. He trusts him, and I think that we're going to get another big game out of Moncrief at a really cheap price. He's going to be a guy who finds his way into my roster a lot, both in cash and GPP games as well. The last guy I want to talk about is a little bit of a flyer, but is a cheap option for you guys that you might want to keep an eye on, and that's Cecil Shorts. Cecil Shorts plays for Houston. DeAndre Hopkins is hurt right now, and it looks like there's a good chance he may miss this game this weekend. If Hopkins is hurt, that's going to be a lot of extra targets that are going to go around. And Shorts is a guy who's already seen a ton of targets. He had 12 targets last week, only wound up with 6 catches out of him. So it's not a great ratio. But again, if he's going to be getting the volume of targets, you know, you can expect him to eventually catch a few more of those. And without Hopkins, he may even see a few more of those. So if he winds up with 12 to 15 targets at $3,500, that's definitely somebody I want in my lineup. It's a pass-happy offense and probably will be until Arian Foster comes back. I do think that you see Chris Polk over Alfred Blue. Jonathan Grimes is hurt, so I think they are going to have to rely a little bit more on the pass game. And if Hopkins isn't in there, you basically are down to Nate Washington on the one side, who's pretty much the deep ball threat, and Shorts, who's the guy who's going to be running a lot of those underneath routes. Again, I don't know if he's going to get 100 yards and get you that 100-yard bonus, but at $3,500, if he makes 6 catches and does it for about 60 or 70 yards, whether or not he catches a touchdown is pretty much irrelevant. He's still going to be returning 3 or 4 points per $1,000 of salary, which is very useful for you, especially in a tournament. In a tournament, he's going to be very low owned, so I think he makes for a really good contrarian play that's going to have some upside just based on the target numbers that he's going to see alone. So those are 5 guys that I really like at the wide receiver position. A lot of them are going to be in my rosters this week. And I think that, you know, those are guys that you guys should definitely have an eye on. I don't think that many of them are going to be very low owned other than Cecil Shorts. But I also don't think that the ownership is going to match what it should be based on how good a matchup all these guys have. So that's been our DraftKings wide receiver picks video for today. Thank you guys for joining us. And as always, stay classy, DFS.